Hi. One last thing before tonight. Might be a little long, so bear with me because I think about stuff. Like when I was speaking with Mike last night, we talked about how I felt that we're in the middle of a civil war, but it's not a war of weapons, a war of elections and war of words. We talked about Gettysburg, and hopefully it fit because I think history always seems to come fit into everything we do if you pay attention to history. And I've always been a fan of history, a fan of past things. I mean, I used to read stories about old baseball players and the old leagues, and if that's all history. There's a great book called The Pot Liquor Papers by John T. Edge that tells you about how certain how recipes and how you cook came from times of slavery in the South and how it kind of percolated into everything that we eat. And it's beautiful. I mean, from ethnic points of view, I've taken courses in Mesoamerican history. It really affects you because you see a big connection to everything. And I also want to thank my first history course teacher, Gloria Dismag, decades ago as a freshman in high school, who connected all the dots for us. She literally taught us how civilizations and religions are all tied together and walked us through history and also taught us how to be good students. So I thank her for that. So, and history is a lot of impression. And if you're an older person like I am, you don't remember a lot of stuff, but you remember the impressions of stuff. So I was growing up with my mom, who was someone active in the civil rights. She was a big Kennedy fan. If you've seen my videos, I have mentioned that she was upset when Robert F. Kennedy was murdered, was assassinated in Los Angeles that night. She was very upset in '68. But Martin Luther King, that whole time, that a lot affected me. Because we lived in South Central LA around that time. We lived around the Coliseum. And you could see, the movements and all that made a difference later on. Also the riots and everything. But those were secondary to what the true movement was. But the one thing I'm noticing right now, when I grew up in politics, Democrats ran that Congress. I mean, you always had a Democratic Congress. You had a Democratic Senate. Tip O'Neill, Robert Byrd, they were the leaders. You had Republican presidents like Nixon and Ford, Reagan. I mean, and then, well, we go back to Johnson, but Democrats always seem to run the Senate and the House. Now, a lot of that changed once we got the Dixiecrats out. And that changed again in the 80s with Reagan, the rise of Reagan, and Republicans embracing a lot of what the Dixiecrats had already left behind. Anyone who knows the word Strom Thurmond can shiver and think about that in South Carolina. But the one thing about Democrats, they always gave us the impression that they were working for the working people, kinda. Reverend Al Sharpton always referred to Democrats as latte liberals. Never understood it. But now as I'm watching Kamala Harris and Tim Walz run, it's all making connections for me. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are middle class folk. They don't come from money. They worked to get where they're at. People may say Kamala Harris worked to get where she was at. She was elected to her positions. She's well off, but she's not like Trump or a lot of politicians we see in the Bush family, for one. Almost regal type of stuff. And that's the one thing I going back and thinking about the attitudes of Democrats in the past have always been elitist, and I get it, and I mean it in this, not the sense of the Republicans say, because they use that to describe themselves by projecting. I mean, is that senators and Democratic senators and Democratic politicians until recently always seem to be try to put themselves above us, not to serve above us, not to relate to us. I know what's better for you because kind of a parent to a young child relationship. You could never really touch them. You could never really speak to them because they were on a different level. But these new Democrats, a lot of them in the House and the Senate, like Reverend Warnock here in Georgia or Jon Ossoff, seem different, and they relate to us, and they want to hear what we say and want to do. They don't dismiss us. And that's the one thing I'm seeing from Kamala Harris, is that she's not dismissive of those around her. She embraces her middle class. She does not push it off. She recognizes that we need more to help people come up and out. Tim Walz is Midwestern middle class to the core. And well, honestly, those on the East Coast in the higher uppers used to make fun of people like Tim Walz. And so that's where everything got squandered with the Democratic Party. They bought into their own elitism. They bought into the money of lobbyists. That's another thing. And then they got sandbagged by Reaganomics and Ronald Reagan. We are been 40 years in the frickin' wilderness due to Reaganomics and the so-called reduction of government that the Republicans shoved down our throat since 1980. They destroyed the middle class. They made excuses for companies to push out of the United States and not build and lose manufacturing jobs. They made excuses to bust unions. They made excuses by saying that the service economy was better for everyone. Meanwhile, the rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and the middle class got squeezed. We seem to be coming out of the 40 years of wilderness now. We're beginning to see with the beginning of Joe Biden, who finally decided to shed off his connections to the elite and starting to do things for the middle class. His idea to turn manufacturing from steel or from hard products into energy and to chips has led to manufacturing jobs expanding, cutting the Chinese out. You wonder why the Chinese want Trump to win? Because they want him to end that growth, because they want it back. We're not dependent on the Chinese for our technology anymore. We're doing it here because Biden gave incentives for chip makers to grow in the United States, and they'd rather work in the United States than China. Also, union jobs are getting a boost. Why? Because of the Infrastructure Act. Everywhere there is building and construction in places, small places, big places, harbors being dredged, bridges rebuilt, internet being put out into the hinterlands by this, and this billions of dollars being spent that go back into the economy because those are good paying jobs and they come back. That's building the middle class. Remember this, and don't let those assholes tell you the difference. In 2 years, President Biden has done more for the United States than anyone else in bills and stuff. I'm so optimistic with the Harris campaign because Harris cares about us. Harris will always care about us. Tim Walz cared about us. Now it's a time to flip history on its head and create an economy, again, from the bottom up, middle out, and everyone succeeds, including the very rich. That's my take. You guys have a good rest of the night.